Hello. I have, just as Karen just mentioned, I have butterflies in my stomach because I'm trying to synthesize what we've heard from these incredible speakers. And I have to tell you, Ashbury College, the number of presenters that you've brought tonight and the caliber of the people who've put this TED Talk together is incredible. I want to thank Adele Chen, who got in touch with me very early on. I want to thank my granddaughter, Natalie Clark, who convinced me that I should do this from faraway Mexico, where I'm currently speaking to you on Zoom. And also Jason Moscan, who I'm doing some work with. His daughter was one of the presenters as well, so I feel like I'm at home. But we've heard a lot of things tonight from a lot of different perspectives. But if you had to synthesize the whole thing, one of the things that really struck me is that every single presenter has asked all of us to go beyond our comfort level. And perhaps the most compelling image, well, two compelling images. First was the compelling image of Cindy Blackstock sitting in the Supreme Court with just two bears supporting the rights of Indigenous children. The second is the explorer, George, who took us to the depths of hell in Uzbekistan. And interestingly, when we heard from Rebecca in her support of pure science, or when we actually heard from some of the other school presenters, there was one thing that I think a theme that crosses the spectrum of all. That theme, first of all, most of you are probably my granddaughter Nat's age, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, what does my life have in store for me? When I was your age, I had no idea that I was going to get into politics. I had no idea that I was actually going to be Canada's first woman deputy prime minister, or that I'd be the first woman ever to have a baby in public office. And that baby is now 33 years old. In fact, when I started high school, we took a little test in guidance, and the guidance teacher came out, and my three top career paths were journalist, lawyer, or actress. I had no idea about politics, but it wasn't until I had actually worked as a journalist, and I had a summer job covering the courts in Hamilton for the Hamilton Spectator, when the thought struck me that, you can sit and report on the news, or you can actually help make public policy that's going to change the world. And when the councillor from the city of Ottawa spoke about race relations and cultural diversity, I decided at a very young age that I was going to do things differently. But that also meant conquering my fears. The first time I ever got on a plane, and this sounds bizarre in this day and age, but the first time I ever got on a plane, I was heading to do my third year in university in l'Université de Rouen in Rouen, France. And I specifically wrote individually, in those days, this was 1972, to every university in France, and I refused to go to a university that actually had a program offered through a Canadian university. Ironically, I first wanted to go to university in Quebec, and I was told by my faculty at UWO that Quebec did not have the educational standards of Ontario, so I would have to go to France. Anyway, I went to France. Long story short, I had $1,600 shoved into my pants. I got on a plane for the first time in my life, took a very long plane ride to Paris, and then took a train to Rouen and landed the first night in a youth hostel. I was petrified. The city at that time was covered with graffiti, which to me was completely new. It's migrated to Canada since. But I stayed in the hostel that night, scared to death somebody was going to rob me, not speaking the language as well as I could. And the next morning, in those days, I smoked cigarettes. Thankfully, I've given them up many years ago, but I decided I would get my first cup of French coffee and a cigarette. And I walked into a cafe. Their cigarettes were without filters, gitanes, black, horrible. And the coffee was like very thick European sledge. So one sip of coffee and one puff of my cigarette, and I went outside and promptly threw up. And I said to myself, and this is literally 50-something years ago, I distinctly remember saying to myself, Sheila, what have you done? What have you gotten yourself into? Fast forward, I go to get back home and I start working for a local newspaper, and an election opportunity came along and I was asked to run, not because I was a great candidate, but my father had a known name in the city and the Liberal Party at that time was desperate for a candidate. So they wanted anybody. So I ended up agreeing to run. I went to my boss at the Hamilton Spectator and I said, I'm giving in my resignation. And he said, this is the biggest mistake you'll ever make in your life. He said, they're using you. You don't have a chance and you're going to be killed. So I said, well, okay, that's my chance I'm taking. And I did. I ended up losing that election in 1977 by 14 votes. And I worked for 4 years and won the next election against the same candidate by over 3,000 votes. Fast forward to Queen's Park. I'm 28 years old. I'm the only woman in the Liberal caucus of 34, and I am the human rights critic. So I have an opportunity back in 1981-82 to rewrite the Human Rights Code. And I decided very early on that I was going to move an amendment to make sure that sexual orientation was a prohibited ground of discrimination. Now, for you people today, that seems like a very common thing, but in those days, it was completely against the norm. Every single person in my own caucus, with the exception of the leader and the Honorable Dawn Boudry, have voted against me. My own mother told me that she wished she could change her name because she was so ashamed of the fact that I was backing a motion to treat gay and lesbians the same as other citizens. And I ended up having a brick thrown through the window of my constituency office and a pamphlet delivered by the same preacher who's now getting a license to have a university in Ontario. This preacher distributed a leaflet in my constituency saying that I would force citizens to hire homosexual babysitters if I was left to have this resolution come through. Now, the resolution failed, but it subsequently became part of the law at the provincial level in the government of Quebec, and then at the federal level later on in politics. And over the course of my political career, I was happy to have been one of the first to do it. But at the time, again, I had to face failure. I had to face the fact that I was standing up for something that I believed in, that I couldn't even muster the support of my full caucus. Fast forward to 1984. The Liberal Party in Ontario is in a bit of a mess. The federal election is called. Again, I'm called upon to run for office in another level, the federal level. And all of my friends told me, don't go, don't go. It's going to be too difficult. It's going to be too hard. My parents wanted me to stay closer to Hamilton because that was my home. And I ended up defying all of them. And I said, no, I'm going to do this. And I woke up the night after I decided to run. For the first time in my life, I had a full cold sweat. And I woke up bolt upright with the same sense of, oh my God, what have I done? So going forward, when I arrived in Ottawa, I realized very quickly that it was the place where I could make the changes and the differences that make a difference. And I don't want to go into all those because at this stage in your life, if you have one career path, I would recommend the most important thing is do what you love, and you will never work a day in your life. When I started in politics, I didn't know I was going to love it as much as I did, and I stayed working in the field for 29 years. And I always felt as though the next day was another opportunity, was another challenge, was another risk. And there has been a common theme tonight amongst all of the speakers, and that is don't be afraid of taking risks. This is one area where, in particular, when you're talking about, we've spoken about discrimination and both racialized and Indigenous discrimination. Well, Canadian women still earn 20 cents less than a man for the same job. And if you graduate from university or college today, as a woman, you are likely to earn that 17% less simply because you have a vagina. It seems absolutely ridiculous, but that is the truth in 2020. And I think when we talk about breaking down discrimination, breaking down barriers, we also have to understand that when we first try to break down those walls, not everybody's going to be with us. Our parents may not like it. Our friends may not like it. The social constructs that say the white men are operating everything may not like it. But at the end of the day, if you pursue the things that you believe in, if you have a passion that you follow, so you don't go out and check the Fortune 500 to see what kind of a job you're going to get to make money, because making money is a byproduct of success. The real success in life is finding something that you love to do. And even if it means going against your parents' wishes, maybe they would like you. My mother always wanted me to stay close to home. She thought Ottawa was far too far away from Hamilton. And in the same vein, I would urge all of you who are thinking about career paths for yourselves, don't be afraid of failure. The first time I ran for office, I lost. I ran for prime minister twice and I lost. But it wasn't a loss, because in every single one of those experiences, I learned something about myself, something about my party, and something about my country. And at the end of the day, it left me looking back on a life that I hadn't mapped out as carefully as the genomes in my gut. I probably should have. I hadn't mapped it out, but I pursued the path of being a risk taker, not being afraid of failure, and pursuing the dreams and the things that you love. If there is nothing else that you get from my TED Talk tonight, those three elements will be a path forward to you to have a happy life. Because at the end of the day, you can have the greatest job, you can have all the titles in the world, you can have an Order of Canada, Officer of the Order of Canada, which I'm very proud of, but that means nothing if you're living a life that doesn't lead you to happiness in family, friends, and in, especially in this time of COVID, I think we're beginning to understand more deeply how we're intertwined and how we each need to help each other. So I hope I've left you with a few things that you can use in your career paths. And if you don't succeed, I must end in this little anecdote. When I was in university, I was the youngest VP ever elected to Students' Council Western, and I had a big budget and everything. And that was another thing. I went to the meeting, somebody put my name up. I didn't even know what I was doing. And I got elected vice president external. And when I came home, at the time I had a boyfriend, I was crazy about him. He was livid. He said, "We won't be able to spend time together. So why are you taking this responsibility?" And anyway, we ended up splitting up, which was probably a good thing. And in the end of my fourth year, I really, really, really wanted to work for foreign affairs, because I had this dream of seeing the world. And I wanted to see the world. And I spoke 4 languages already fairly well, 3 quite well. And when I put my name in for an application to be interviewed by Foreign Affairs, you had to just fill out this form in an application. And then I got a wrote letter back. This was 1974. "Dear Sheila Kotz," spelled C-O-T-T-S. They didn't even spell my name right. "We are sorry, but you are not a qualified candidate for Foreign Affairs Canada." So I ended up going down a completely different path. Never did join the public service, but ended up becoming the Deputy Prime Minister of the country. And so things have a way of working out. And sometimes I was so devastated when I didn't get accepted in Foreign Affairs. I thought, what will my life be? And it turned out to be something that I could never have planned in my wildest dreams, and it was wonderful. So pursue your dreams and don't be afraid of failing. John Diefenbaker ran for office 7 times before he ever got elected, and he ended up becoming prime minister of another party, but it's worth looking at that if at first you don't succeed, that adage really does work. So have a great evening, and thanks so much for all the speakers' contributions, and how I think there's been a common message for all of us that life really requires us to think differently and be adventuresome and take risks and do not fear failure. Hope you enjoyed my talk.